Have you ever heard of Dark Souls? It would be a big surprise if you haven't. The game is so well known, most video game journalists use it as the epitome of difficult video games. Apparently, they never heard of this one. But I digress. Although Dark Souls isn't the first game in what's known as the Soulsborne series, it can definitely be credited for popularizing it. See, as brilliant as Demon's Souls was not what one might call a financial success. It did, however, get a decent cult following, so From Software, the team behind Demon's Souls, decided to make a spiritual successor by the name of Dark Souls. The game was so successful it managed to sell over 1 million units in the US and Europe during its first 6 months after its release. A very impressive feat considering it was released 1 month before Skyrim. Although many people know From Software because of their Soulsborne games, not many people know the team's other games, such as Armored Core, Ninja Blade, Shadow Tower, Evergrace, and what is arguably their best game yet, The Adventures of Cookie and Cream. There's also the Kingsfield series, although that one is a bit more well known as many Souls fans consider it the precursor to the Souls games. Anyway, today we'll be taking a look at one of their lesser known games and their first attempt at a survival horror, Echo Night. Echo Night was initially released in 1998 and was published by From Software in Japan and by H-Tech in the US a year later. At this point, From Software have only made action games and dungeon crawlers, so this was very different from what they were used to making. So were they able to make a decent adventure game, or was this genre shift a bad idea? I remember playing the game when it came out and I remember liking it quite a lot, so does it still hold up, or did it not age too well? To answer these questions and more, let's dive right in. Before we do that though, here's your spoiler warning. Throughout this video, I'll be spoiling some major plot points and will be showing the solution to some of the game's puzzles. However, I will not be spoiling the game's ending. So if you're planning on playing Echo Night and don't mind a few spoilers here and there, then you can continue watching this video. Otherwise, I suggest you play the game first before you do so. The game is set in the year 1937 and starts off with Richard Osman, the game's protagonist, receiving an envelope from his father, which only contains a small key. A few seconds later, he receives a call from the police telling him that his father's house has been burned down. They ask him to accompany a police officer to the house in question. Once they reach there and the police officer is done insulting Richard's father, you get control of Richard, and now you can look around and investigate the house. You find a winding key and a locked grandfather clock which can be unlocked using the key you received from your father. You then use the winding key and a secret passage is revealed behind the clock. Once you go through the passage, you find a book which takes you back to the year 1899 on board a moving train. After looking around for a bit, you spy on an interaction between this young man and this old man. Apparently, the young man has been following this older man around, attempting to stop his evil doings. We know the old man is evil because he's using his own granddaughter as leverage over the young man. The youth is unwilling to risk the girl's life, so the old jerk takes advantage of that and shoots him. Once he leaves the room, the young man gets up and gives a blue stone to the old man's granddaughter, Kriya. He tells her to keep it secret from her granddad and that the stone will protect her from harm. Not bullets though. Apparently it doesn't protect the owner from bullets. The young man then tells her his name, and that's when you find out that this is your father when he was younger. Henry moves towards the train's last cart, and the old man, seeing that Henry is still alive, goes after him. You go there and witness their last interaction with each other, where Henry reveals that the old man, whose name is William Rockwell, is possessed by some sort of stone. He promises Rockwell that he'll be back and then falls off the train. Rockwell pulls out a dagger with a red stone on it and goes all Smeagol over it. As soon as he notices you standing behind him, you get pulled back to present time, back in your dad's house. A short puzzle later, you discover a painting of the Orpheus, a passenger liner owned by the Rockwell family that mysteriously disappeared back in 1913, along with all its crew and passengers. You interact with the painting and you get transported to the now haunted ship. This is where you spend most of the game, as you walk around, talk to ghosts, solve puzzles, and get to the bottom of the mysteries this ship hides. That's easier said than done, of course, as there are 3 demons haunting this ship and they will not hesitate to harm you. Whilst exploring the ship, you find a book that takes you to this place. Here, you meet the medium. He tells you that he's blind and that he uses that book as his means to see. He asks you to give him any astral spheres you collect from rescued ghosts and tells you that he needs them for a specific experiment. He also gives you half of the blue stone, which brings us to the two stones this game revolves around. Later on, you discover that the red stone possessing William Rockwell grants its wielder the power to change their destiny, whilst the blue stone grants its wielder the power to lie to little children about what the blue stone can do. Seriously, I have no idea what the blue stone does. All we know is that it's meant to be the key to stopping the red stone's powers. And this is where the story lost me. See, the game has this knack for starting mysteries and never giving us any answers. We're told that this ship has mysteriously vanished, but we're never told why or how. We know that William Rockwell and his family own this ship, so did he kill every single person on it? If so, then what was his plan? Operate the ship single-handedly and return to shore? Or perhaps everyone was killed by the three demons that are roaming around. Also, what's with these demons? Why did they turn into aggressive spirits after death, unlike all the other ghosts on this ship? Was it because all three of them were killed by a Rockwell? That can be true, as we see later that William's son Arthur and his wife Hilda were both killed by William. Is it because they were killed with the red stone? No, that can't be true because the king was killed with a normal sword. Not to mention, both Arthur and Hilda were killed by the red stone, and yet they're just normal ghosts. We're told that the red stone has the power to change its wielder's destiny and that the blue stone is meant to be its opposite. But it's never explained how it works. Like, does it lock destinies instead of changing them? And where did these stones come from? Who created them? And for what purpose? After giving the medium all 26 astral spheres in the game, he uses them to create a new red stone. So does that mean he also created the first one? If so, then who is he? And why is he creating these stones? And what about your father, Henry Osmond? Apparently, William killed Henry's parents, and that's why Henry is hunting him down. So how did he end up with the blue stone? And why did he give it to Creia Rockwell instead of keeping it? She's just a child and she wouldn't know what to do with it. He should have kept it and then given it to his son Richard when he was old enough. Speaking of Richard Osmond, he has this power that allows him to travel back in time and physically enter memories of other people. Is this an Osmond family power? It can't be the power of the blue stone, as Richard was able to do it well before the medium gave him the stone, and even then he only gave him half the stone. It's never explained, and we're just meant to accept that both Richard and his father can do this. None of this is ever explained, which makes the game feel very pretentious. It's like the game is trying to look more complex than it actually is. Honestly, at some point, I stopped caring about the story and just went along with everything. When making a mystery game, you can't just be vague about everything and explain nothing. Sure, keeping some things from the player is fine, but keeping the whole plot a mystery and revealing nothing? Then what's the point of playing the game if none of it will pay off? The reason Dark Souls gets away with not spoon-feeding its players the entire picture is because the game gives us all the clues we need to piece things together. The full story is there, it's just not given to us freely. You need to look for the clues yourself. In this game, however, it looks like even the writers didn't know what the full story is, and I honestly don't want to believe that. We're talking about a team that usually writes amazing lore behind their games. Even the Kingsfield series has deep lore to it. So it's kinda weird that the one time they get a chance to make the story the main focus of their game, they make a pretentious, uninteresting story that offers very little payoff, even with all 4 of its different endings, which I won't spoil. And it's not the fault of the game's writing, as the writing is not bad at all. It's not great, however it fits well with the game's overall atmosphere. I especially like how melancholy the ghosts sound.
I can't taste a thing. I guess there is no need for a drink when you're dead.
I guess part of why I liked it is because of the voice acting, which is pretty good for an obscure PS1 game.
What do you want? You're not worthy of sitting here yet. Come back later.
The only characters that have voice acting are the ghosts, the 3 demons, and the medium, and overall, I think they did a good job.
Eleanor, my daughter.
My pendant. Our lost memories. My doll. Father gave this to me.
Sure, some of it could have been done better.
He's not here. Where did he go?
But for the most part, I don't have much to complain about. The ghosts' voices are eerie, and they fit the overall aesthetic of the game very well.
It's quiet. Now I can finally rest.
And you gotta love the medium's glorious voice.
So how goes your journey aboard the ship? It seems pretty fun. You don't have to be scared. I just possess an alien power.
If I had one complaint about the writing, it would be that sometimes it's obvious that the game was written by a non-native English speaker. Take this part for example. Rockwell finds out that Henry survived the gunshot and says this. Now, I know what he meant by saying this. He's probably saying it with an exasperated voice, as he was annoyed that he couldn't get rid of Henry that easily. However, the way it was worded was pretty weird. Without hearing his voice, it's hard to tell what his tone was when saying this. I think it would have been better if he said something like, "Of course he wouldn't die that easily," or "should have known he wouldn't die that easily." To be fair, this game was made by a Japanese team, so of course they're not native English speakers. And I assume they didn't have the budget for a more professional localization team, so it's really not that big of an issue. At least it's better than the writing in this god-awful game. The music in this game is not bad, but it's nothing to write home about. Some tracks are quite good, such as the main theme. And Kreia Rockwell's theme. Others are pretty generic, especially the ones that are meant to be unnerving. I can't say that I loved any specific track, however, I also don't think any specific track could be considered bad. Well, maybe the casino one. Though it's not because the track itself is bad, it's because you're gonna be listening to it on repeat for a long time. We'll get to that later though. The game's graphics are not good. No surprise there, as most 3D games of the 90s looked pretty weird and they were even worse on the PS1. Unless the game had 2D graphics such as Lomax, or pre-rendered backgrounds such as Oddworld, it probably didn't age well as far as visuals go. This is one of the ones that didn't age well. Most areas look flat and uninteresting, and the colors are pretty boring. And some parts look downright unfinished. It's definitely not the worst looking PS1 game I've seen though, and it's a clear upgrade from FromSoft's previous games. However, that's not saying much, as their previous games looked like this. Heck, even the game itself doesn't trust its own visuals, as it always feels the need to tell you what you're looking at. Let's talk about the gameplay. First-person survival horror games are pretty common nowadays. You've probably heard of games such as Amnesia: Dark Descent, Outlast, and Alien Isolation. Even Capcom had a go at it with Resident Evil 7. Well, Echo Knight was a first-person survival horror before they were cool. Though I think calling it a horror game is a bit of an exaggeration. The game is meant to be scary, however, I'm not sure it really succeeds at that. See, most of the game's horror elements come from the ever-present threat of the three demons. However, they only appear when it's dark and are only a problem if you can't find a light source. So in most cases, this is what happens every time you enter a new room. There, problem solved. Sometimes, however, the light switches won't work, and when you're playing the game for the first time and you don't know which rooms have working light and which don't, there's going to be some level of tension involved. However, any subsequent playthroughs are gonna be significantly less tense. Unfortunately, even during your first playthrough, the tension isn't enough to make the game scary, as the demons give you ample time to find the light switch, which is usually somewhere around the door. And if the light doesn't turn on, you can just get out before they appear. The only part of the game that comes close to being scary was the last third of the game, where the King Demon gets introduced. He's technically the least unsettling out of the three, as the little girl and the young lady give out a creepy chuckle whenever they appear, and the king just sounds like a zombie. However, his section of the ship was the creepiest, and until you solve a specific puzzle, none of the lights will be working. So you basically have like 3 safe rooms where he can't attack you. Walking down a dark hallway knowing that he'll appear at any moment was the scariest this game ever got, and that's pretty disappointing. The game could have been a lot scarier if the light switches weren't so close to the door, or if they'd allow demons to attack you in rooms that have friendly ghosts in them. Or they could have removed almost all lights and just relied on the game's day and night cycle. All rooms on the upper deck could have had windows which bring in natural sunlight, making you prefer exploring during the day rather than at night. Whilst most rooms in the lower decks can't get natural light and only a few of them would have working light switches. The day and night cycle is already there, so I don't see why it wouldn't have been used as the main lighting mechanic in this game. Look at how unsettling this hallway is during nighttime, and look at how pleasant it is during daytime. And this is on one of the lower levels of the ship. The only reason they added a day and night cycle is for one single puzzle. And one more reason for me to hate the casino. And trust me, we will get to the casino soon enough. Other than that, it's just for aesthetics. The system I'm suggesting is already implemented in the game, by the way. The wheelhouse has a large window which lets in a lot of natural light during the day. When the sun is down and the lights are out, the little girl demon can attack you here. However, when it's sunny outside, she won't. The system is already there, and I don't know why they didn't take advantage of it. Not only does the game have a day and night cycle, but it also has different weather conditions, and it's all wasted. Echo Knight could have been one of the scariest games on the PS1 if they worked more on the lighting mechanics, but as it stands now, it's mildly unnerving at best. The only thing that's making this game scary is its awful controls. To be fair, it's not easy to make good first-person controls on PS1, especially since most first-person games didn't use the PS1's DualShock controllers. But this is an adventure game, not a first-person shooter. Games like Doom and Alien Trilogy don't have up and down aiming, which makes them much easier to control. And games like Quake 2 and The World Is Not Enough have most of their enemies on the same level as your default aiming position, so you rarely need to move your crosshairs. Echo Knight, on the other hand, will require you to move your crosshairs a lot more, since there will be many items and objects that are too low to interact with without aiming. Sometimes you even need to crouch to get them. So aiming in this game is important, and it should not be annoying. The control scheme is pretty similar to that of Kingsfield, but with some differences. You turn around using the directional buttons, strafe using the R1 and R2 buttons, and point up and down using the L1 and L2 buttons. Using the L buttons to point up and down is not bad, and it's kinda intuitive. However, I always get confused when trying to strafe, since my brain can't handle a higher button strafing one way and a lower button strafing the other. In Kingsfield, the strafe buttons are L1 and R1. whilst the up and down buttons were L2 and R2. This makes strafing easier but made looking up or down more difficult. So sadly, there's no win-win solution here. Thankfully, unlike Kingsfield, this is an adventure game, so you don't really need to strafe much. Definitely not during situations where you're in any sort of danger. And you won't encounter situations where you'll need to aim whilst you're in a hurry either, since most light switches in this game are reachable in your default aiming position. Although the aiming can be annoying, overall it doesn't bother me that much. What does bother me is how slow you are when walking. This is your speed on the fastest setting. And this is the slowest. When you hit a wall, you don't get stuck, which is good. However, if you're carrying something and that something touches anything else, you do get stuck. This is especially annoying when you need to move something out of the way to open a door or cabinet, but there's not much room to move. I also dislike the head bobbing whilst moving. Thankfully, you can turn that off in the options. Actually, you can do a lot of things in the options, which is pretty cool. You can remove the crosshairs, change the game's font, change your walking and turning speeds, change the control scheme so that it's exactly like that of Kingsfield, and have the directional buttons used for strafing and the L and R buttons used for aiming. The game is trying its best to be as easy to control as possible, so I can't really fault it for the effort. It also makes sense that the game would allow you to use the Kingsfield control scheme, as it was clearly made using the same engine. The game has mechanics that wouldn't make sense in an adventure game, but are perfectly normal for a dungeon crawler, such as needing to equip certain items instead of using them. Take this part for example. You need rubber gloves to be able to put a new fuse in this electric box. However, you can't just use the gloves on the box, as that does nothing. You need to equip it from the items menu. Speaking of which, let's talk about the game's puzzles. The game has a nice variety in puzzles, however very few of them were challenging, which is a shame since most of them had a lot of potential and were really interesting. The majority of the puzzles were inventory based and feel very Resident Evil-like, where you just look for something you need and use it where it's needed. They reminded me of Resident Evil because you're always asked whether you want to pick up an item or not. Some of the items you need are in someone's memory, and while sometimes it's as simple as entering a memory and taking the item, other times taking the item requires solving an interesting puzzle. For example, finding a way to distract this library employee to take a book he was looking at, or entering a memory at a specific time to ensure the doctor isn't there to stop you from taking what you need. The game also has a few logic puzzles that I enjoyed, such as figuring out how to open the necessary locker or learning how to use this Morse code transmitter. My favorite one was this puzzle, where you need to talk to this ghost, but a demon keeps getting in the way, so you need to figure out how to stop her from doing so. These puzzles are pretty well made, however I felt like they were a bit too easy, or the game was spoon-feeding you the solutions. Take this puzzle for example. To save this drunk ghost, you need to give him the drink his friend Eddie used to make for him. To find out how to make that drink, you need to go into this room, which has a few paintings with very similar themes. Behind the counter, you find a cupboard that has 4 bottles with symbols used in the paintings you just saw. One of those paintings had the initials EM signed on it, and Richard states that the painting has 1 man, 1 axe, and 2 snakes. Immediately I figured out that the drink I need has 1 part man drink, 1 part axe drink, and 2 parts snake drink. This was a very interesting puzzle, however it was way too easy to figure out. What bothers me is that it could have been more challenging with just a few changes. First off, the paintings and drinks should have been in separate rooms. For example, the paintings could have been on the hallway's walls, whilst the drinks remain in the ballroom. Second, as soon as I saw a painting with the same elements I found on the bottles and was signed by EM, I immediately knew that this painting was drawn by Eddie and is necessary to figure out how to make his drink. A solution to this would be to have multiple paintings signed by an E. One could be signed by an EM, another by an EF, and a third by an ES. If you look around for a bit, you find a message left by Eddie, which also includes his last name. Now you know which of these painters is Eddie. Third, Richard should not spell out everything in the painting. In fact, the paintings shouldn't even be interactable. These paintings are big and noticeable, and the game's visuals aren't awful to the point where you can't tell what's going on in them or what the painter's initials are. This would have made solving the puzzle feel more like an accomplishment rather than feeling like you did what you were told to do. This isn't really a big issue, but I couldn't help but feel disappointed with how easy the puzzles were. But it's okay, because they added this casino room to make up for the lack of challenge in the puzzles. God, I hate the casino room so much. There are 3 ghosts here, and they can only be released if you beat this blackjack champion at blackjack. However, she refuses to play with you until you prove that you're lucky enough to go against her. You do so by playing roulette or the slot machine. I have 2 major issues with the casino games in this room. Number 1. Gambling games aren't inherently fun. The fun comes from the rush you get when you win. However, when you're playing casino games without any real stakes, they're pretty boring. Number 2, it's bad enough that they added casino games, but they made the odds as low as they are in real casinos. Why are you doing this, game? You're not gaining any real money when I lose. You're not losing any real money when I win. You have no reason to make these games so relentless. Why not just tweak the odds in the player's favor a bit? Why do I need to spend over 30 minutes on this section in a game that could be beaten in less than 2 hours? These chips can't be used outside this room, so they are literally useless. To make matters worse, the casino has operating hours, so if you didn't finish this section before the casino closes, you need to wait outside until it opens again, which takes a considerable amount of time. How did they think this was okay? I'm also unclear on what the goal is here. When you start playing blackjack, the goal is to double the 100 chips you enter with, so I thought the goal is to reach 100 chips playing roulette or the slot machine. The reason I was sure about this was that every time I got invited to the blackjack table, it's when I recently reached 100 chips. But that's not the case. See, throughout the game, you find these claim tickets that can be used to get you 20 chips each. Which means 5 tickets should get you 100 chips, and the game has more than 5 tickets scattered around. So I thought, cool, I can just give the casino manager 5 tickets, get 100 chips, and move on to the blackjack table. Nope, the manager will only accept tickets from you till you have 80 chips, and won't accept any more tickets from you whilst you have more than 60. I thought, okay, no problem. I'll just play until I turn those 80 chips to 100, no big deal. That didn't work, however, as I reached up to 150 chips and I still wasn't invited to the blackjack table. I read somewhere that you need to win twice in a row to be invited, but that doesn't seem to work either. Why are they making this part so hard? It doesn't need to be this hard. And that's not even mentioning the blackjack game. It was like playing real-life blackjack but without any real stakes. The only thing you will lose is your self-esteem because she won't stop calling you weak and telling you that you suck. Oh, and you'll also be losing your sanity because throughout this entire part, you'll be listening to this track non-stop. I hate the casino section so much. The only redeeming factor about this part is that it's optional and isn't necessary to beat the game. However, if you don't finish it, 2 of the 4 endings this game offers will be unavailable, and that includes the good ending and the bad ending. It's like telling your kids, it's okay, you don't have to eat this broccoli, but instead of chocolate cake for dessert, I'm giving you prunes. Why did I choose broccoli and prunes as examples of stuff that taste bad? I actually like broccoli and prunes. And to top it all off, this game has a glitch, or heck, it could be a feature for all I know, where the light bulbs on the constellation panels are off and the specific light bulb you need to turn becomes inactive, and you can't move it. I don't know why this happens, and I don't know how I fixed it, but after fidgeting with everything, I was able to fix it. So if you ever play this game, take my advice. As soon as you reach this specific hallway, immediately go to this bulb and turn it to turn on the lights. And I do think you should give this game a chance. Yes, it's not great, but it does have enough interesting things going for it. Sure, the story is mediocre, the visuals aren't great, and the game isn't as scary as it could have been. but the puzzles are good enough to keep you interested and the game is somewhat atmospheric. Not to mention, this game is a piece of From Software history and it was really fun to see where they were and compare it to where they are now. It's a shame that From Software stuck to the Soulsborne formula and probably won't experiment like they did with this game ever again. However, I'd love to see them make a new first-person survival horror with all the experience they've gained so far. Echo Night had 2 sequels, then was never visited again, so it might be interesting to see it come back someday. If you want to check this game out for yourself and you own a PS3 or a PS Vita, you can get it in the PS1 Classics section on PSN. It's not great and it has its fair share of flaws, but I'm sure you'll find something to appreciate about it. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you want to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. If you like this channel and want to support it, you can do so by subscribing to my Patreon or buying me a coffee on ko-fi.com. If you have any suggestions for games you'd like me to cover, feel free to mention them in the comments section. Not gonna lie, I feel kind of embarrassed that I chose a very tame horror game for my first Halloween special. I genuinely remember it being scarier when I was a kid. So to make up for it, here's what I found on the nursery's wallpaper. Thank you so much for watching and happy Halloween!